Chapter 81. 81. Who said necromancers can fight? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 81. Who said necromancers can fight? Translator. Lonely Tree Withering Light was a unique ability. After activation, it was similar to a halo effect, but it could not be stacked. The HP reduction was not much, but the advantage was that it continued to reduce HP. This characteristic was very advantageous in a long tug-of war. Another unique feature was that it was not Matthew's mana that was used to activate and maintain this ability. It was the soul fire of the chosen undead. In a sense, this was a mutual destruction. However, Matthew did not care about this flaw. Would a necromancer lack cannon fodder? He looked at the densely packed kobolds and silvermoon zombies in front of him. Matthew felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Withering Light is also a perfect ability for corpse explosion, but the casting distance is not far enough. In fact, summoning so many undead creatures at the same time, Matthew also realized that his control range was reaching its limit. This was not only related to mana but also to vision. Matthew looked around. Soon, he locked onto a tall oak tree. In the next moment, he transformed into a raven and spread his wings while he flew. At this moment, the moonlight was strong, and Matthew did not sway forward at all when he entered the wilderness form. His movements were very smooth. With a few flops, he successfully arrived at the top of the tree. After transforming back into his human form, Matthew stood still and looked ahead. His vision suddenly widened, and his control over the undead creatures returned to a steady level of proficiency. At this moment, the owl Ella flew over. She shouted nervously, "Matthew, there are too many enemies. I'm a little afraid. I don't dare to fight with you. I can only give you some help within my ability." As she spoke, a white light appeared from her body and quickly entered Matthew's body. Hint. You have received the high-level blessing of Ella, the soul of nature, elegance of the wind, elegance of the wind. Your evasion has been greatly increased. Evasion was a good attribute. Before Matthew could thank her, another white light suddenly flew over from the crown of the oak tree and sank into his body. Hint. You have received Fairy Princess Lulu's high-level blessing, good luck bang bang, good luck bang bang. Your luck has been greatly improved. Matthew looked down. Below the tree crown, a group of oak tree fairies were talking about something. Then, they cheered Matthew on. As for the shy Lulu, after casting the advanced blessing, it disappeared without a trace. However, Matthew still felt that his chances of winning were greatly increased with the two high-level blessings. He knew that even for nature's soul, casting a high-level blessing was extremely taxing. This could be seen from Ella's listless state. Lulu was probably no exception. I must guard the oak forest. Matthew turned his firm gaze back to the battlefield. Just as the enemy was completing their deployment and preparation, the first reinforcement from Rolling Stone Town was already in position. It was the garrison led by Blake. There were about 20 people. They were also well equipped and well armed. However, they did not have horses, so they arrived a little slower. Under Matthew and Blake's communication, this group of guards was arranged behind the undead creatures, forming the second line of defense in the north of the oak forest. If Matthew's undead army was broken through, then they would have to face the enemy head-on. The Knights of the Lord's Guards were arranged between the front line and the eastern firewall. This meant that they could cut into the battlefield from both sides at any time to complete tasks such as breaking the array. However, even territorial disputes were rare these days. In recent years, the Knights only had the experience of exterminating bandits and expelling kobolds. On the real battlefield, whether they could display actual combat strength was still a big question mark. Zeller and his elemental guarded the eastern route. No matter what, they could not let the gnolls attack the farm area. This was the consensus of Matthew and the others. However, in this way, the pressure of the main battlefield was almost completely on Matthew. But Matthew was not afraid at all. Instead, he became even more excited. Because this was what a necromancer should be like in his dreams. One person could defend against tens of millions of enemies. Boiling, the bone dragon that was hiding among the undead lowered its head. The flickering soul fire made it look even more mysterious and majestic. It's here. Matthew's eyes narrowed. At the very front. The wild Boorman warrior carrying the flag was the first to charge into the kobold zombies. Withering light. Matthew immediately ignited the soul fire of a few zombies. Gray light filled with negative energy shot out from the bodies of the undead and quickly enveloped the body of the wild boar warrior. However, the latter was not afraid at all. He did not even use the huge axe on his back. Instead, he held the flag with both hands and waved it left and right as if he was sweeping the ground. Walala! The zombies in front of the wild boarman were sent flying. The kobolds on both sides that were hit by his battle flag were also sent flying in the air like trash that had been swept away. What a powerful warrior! Matthew's eyelids twitched. The undead army was not as resilient as the human infantry. At the same time, the Boorman warrior's physique was too terrifying. No one could stand up to him. Matthew noticed that he had a dark red luster similar to Anderson's. This guy's position in the order of calamity was obviously not low. It looked like the fierce wild Boorman warrior was about to tear through the defense line with his own strength. Chapter 82. 82, Who Said Necromancers Can't Fight? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 82. Who Said Necromancers Can't Fight? Translator. Lonely Tree Matthew could only order the bone dragon to intercept the Boorman. An unwillingness came from the contract. However, Filey still charged forward aggressively. Rumble. The skeletal dragon trotted over and charged forward. The undead in front of it moved away. The wild Boorman warrior shouted, "Perfect timing." He threw away his battle flag and charged at the bone dragon with his giant axe. Behind him, the low-profile draken warrior followed closely behind with a glowing magic sword in his hand. He chanted a spell in a low voice. Every few seconds, a layer of light appeared on the body of the wild Boorman warrior. When he arrived in front of the bone dragon, the wild boar men seemed to be wearing colorful neon lights, which looked quite scary. These two are obviously old partners. Fortunately, the troll and the drow didn't join them. Matthew felt a lot of pressure. These two Tier 4 adventurers were too ruthless. The Draken man did not even make a move, and the undead on the battlefield was almost scattered by the boar men. This made Matthew eager to have a dark night or death night. Just one bone dragon was still too weak. In his thoughts, Filey was about to collide head-on with the wild Boorman warrior, but Filey was quite cunning. During the process of charging, it had always held back its strength. Just as it was about to collide, it suddenly changed its direction and tilted to the side. "Where are you going?" The wild Boorman raised his battle axe and slashed in the direction the bone dragon turned. In the next second, bang! This sweeping tail hit the wild Boorman right in the face. Almost instantly, his face was torn into a bloody mess, and his entire body was sent flying. "Good job. How sinister!" Matthew praised in surprise. From this exchange, it could be seen that Filey was not someone who only knew how to bully the weak. It also had its own unique understanding of battles between people of the same level. However, Matthew's happiness only lasted for less than 2 seconds. In the smoke, a fluorescent light shot into the sky. Unlike the wild Boorman's brash bravery, the Draken's charge was more elegant. His footsteps were steady, and his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had rushed to little Philey's side. Puff! Philey was caught off guard, and the Draken stabbed the demonic sword in his hand into the bones under Philey's rib. Bone dragons had no flesh and blood. The sword itself could not cause much damage to Philey. However, after the demonic sword stabbed in, bolts of light purple lightning kept pouring out. In just an instant, the pale purple lightning weaved layers of lightning nets on the skeletal dragon's body. Philey suddenly let out a sorrowful cry. His soul fire shook violently. His body swayed left and right, losing his balance. Warning! Your bone dragon has been inflicted with the lightning bind curse of Scalona the sword. He has temporarily lost part of its ability to move. Philey struggled. His movements became slow and weak. The half-dragon man clutched the demonic sword tightly. The scales on his body became even more azure. To make matters worse, the Borman warrior, who had half of his face torn off, actually got up from the ground. He raised his axe and charged again. This time, his target was the skeletal dragon's tail. Woo-woo! Under the assault of two Tier 4 elite warriors, the bone dragon's decline was obvious. At the critical moment, two kobold silvermoon zombies pounced over. Bang! Bang! Spell! The last dance. The zombie's self-destruction was more powerful than the skeleton's. Although it could not cause much damage to the Draken, it cut off the communication between him and the magic sword in time. Matthew was worried, so he used corpse explosion on the zombie's body. The charging wild boarman was also entangled by a zombie. Matthew used a combo of self-destruct and corpse explosion combo. Under the violent explosion, the wild boarman's axe finally cracked. The purple lightning flashed and disappeared. After getting a chance to catch his breath, the skeletal dragon stood up almost immediately. Instead of running away, he turned around and pounced. Boom! The battlefield was filled with dust again. Philey's sudden attack forced the Draken and the Boarman to roll to the side. The former launched another skilled sweep. Even though the two Tier 4 powerhouses had also dodged it, a suitable distance appeared between the two sides. Just like that, under cover of the other undead, the bone dragon fought and retreated, finally leaving the attack range of the Draken and the wild boar man. On the tree crown, Matthew wiped away his cold sweat. Elite Tier 4 was indeed difficult to deal with. Whether it was Anderson or the two foreign warriors in front of him, their resistance, combat power, techniques, and tactics were almost impeccable. He glanced at the eastern part of the battlefield. Over there, Anderson personally led the gnolls to attack. Blake took the initiative to fight him. To Matthew's surprise, Blake, who was only at Tier 3, could actually withstand Anderson's ferocious attack head-on. This meant that Big Beard could be considered to be born with divine strength. Eli and Zeller stood behind him to provide support. Zeller was at least a 4th-tier warlock. In a short period of time, both sides were in a stalemate. As long as the troll and drow warrior don't join the battle, we can still drag this on. Matthew retracted his gaze. He looked warily at the wild boarmen who were charging left and right among the undead. However, in the next second, Matthew suddenly realized that the boarman warrior in his field of vision had disappeared. His gaze suddenly shifted to the Draken beside him. At this moment, the latter was holding the demonic sword high and silently muttering something, staring at him with burning eyes. A strong sense of danger struck. Matthew transformed into a raven and flew back without hesitation. However, it seemed to be too late. A blue portal appeared above the tree. The wild boarman warrior suddenly appeared. Half of his face had turned into a bloody paste, and his expression became even more ferocious. Ha ha ha. Good teleportation, Medes. You are the 17th mage to die under our invincible cooperation. As he spoke, he waved his huge axe and hacked at the raven. In a life-and-death crisis, the Moonlight Society had given him a +1 attribute to all attributes while he was in the shape-shifting form. It was enough to allow the raven he had transformed into to have extraordinary speed. Whoosh! Matthew just flapped his wings and flew away. The terrifying axe wind brushed past his feathers. The wild boarman let out when he missed his attack. However, his reaction was also very fast. He kicked on the branch and threw his axe at the raven. The raven's path was blocked off. Matthew had no choice but to take the challenge head-on. Before the wild boarman could catch him, Matthew took the initiative to undo his shape-shifting form. Bang! The two people's heads collided, and they hugged each other in mid-air. "Oh, lovely Necromancer, you don't really want to fight me in a melee, do you?" The wild boarman laughed wildly. The two of them hugged each other and fell down. As soon as he landed, the wild boarman's rough hands immediately grabbed Matthew's neck. He smiled cruelly and exerted force with both hands. Just as he was about to snap Matthew's neck, he felt the air in his hands. Under the boarman's incredulous gaze, the body part above Matthew's chest had actually turned incorporeal. "Who said necromancers can't fight in melee?" Matthew stared at him coldly. He shook off the glove on his right hand, and a violent, uncontrollable negative energy surged out. "Pah!" At that moment, Matthew's right hand also grabbed the thick neck of the wild boar. Hint: you have used undead body to transform part of your body into ghost form. You have used pale hand on the wild boar warrior. Chapter 83. 83, Unforgivable. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 83. Unforgivable. Translator. Lonely Tree. Even though he felt the negative energy overflowing from the pale hand, the Boorman warrior was not afraid at all. Instant death for spells or skills below legendary tier almost never worked. This was also an important reason why there were very few mid and low-level necromancers who focused on instant death spells. The wild boarman relied on his strong physique and could easily bypass all of this. So he ignored Matthew's actions and placed his hands on the ground, trying to get up to find his axe. Undead form did not mean that it was immune to all damage. Many enchanted weapons could cause damage to specters, and his axe happened to be one of them. "You're dead, Necromancer." The wild boar warrior growled and wanted to walk to the side. However, Matthew stuck to him like gangrene. The neck of the Boorman warrior was very thick, and the pale hand could only grab a small part of it. Moreover, no matter how hard Matthew tried, he could not leave even a mark on the neck of the wild boarman. Only the terrifying negative energy was continuously being injected into the enemy's body. Every minute and every second, the Boorman warrior was triggering the instant death check from pale hand. However, his physique was indeed extremely powerful. Matthew pinched him for a few seconds, but he was still safe and sound. "I told you, you're dead." The Boorman warrior was extremely rough. He dragged Matthew to the side. If Matthew's body weren't in the undead state, he would have been dragged until his skin and flesh were torn apart. But Matthew was also very persistent. He just hung on to the body of the wild boar warrior. All his strength was channeled into the pale hand. In the chaos, the wild boarman dragged Matthew and rushed 7 to 8 meters away. Just as he was about to grab his axe, a strange shriek suddenly came from the pale hand. "Wait!" The wild boar warrior seemed to have sensed something and let out a shrill roar. At that moment, the indomitable momentum of the wild boarman suddenly stopped. His eyes were wide open, and his entire body was turning gray at a speed visible to the naked eye. A thick aura of death bloomed from his body. Bang! His sturdy body fell to the ground. His entire face turned into a stiff greenish-gray color, and a large amount of negative energy involuntarily dissipated from it. Matthew lay on his body and panted heavily. He could not help but look at his right hand. Something seemed to have awakened in the pale hand. Hint. Due to your increased luck value, the pale hand's instant death has taken effect. You have killed Borman Warrior Banwen. Pale hand killed and captured a high quality soul, LV-14. Effect increasing. Attack range plus 1 meter instant death check effectiveness slightly increased. The effectiveness of pale hand could be increased. Matthew, who had survived the disaster, was shocked at first, but then he was attacked by intense pain. The effect of the undead body had ended, and there were still many superficial wounds on his body from being dragged by the wild Borman. If it weren't for the sobriety sticker on his forehead, his will and focus would probably drop drastically at this moment. It hurts. Luckily, I have the undead body in pale hand. Matthew barely managed to stand up. He saw Ella and Peggy rushing back to help. At this moment, in the enemy camp ahead, a voice filled with grief and indignation was heard. The Draken-cursed warrior revealed a sorrowful expression. In the next second, he charged at Matthew like a madman. His speed was so fast that it made one's hair stand on end. After a few moves, he crossed the line of the undead. The guards immediately went up to meet them, but the Draken's figure suddenly fluctuated violently. His figure disappeared from the spot. A few seconds later, he appeared again near an oak tree in a flash. The Draken's charge seemed elegant, but it was also unstoppable. When he passed by the oak tree, his body crashed into it and directly broke the 3-meter tall oak tree. Boom! The oak tree fell to the ground. The Draken quickly approached Matthew. However, at that moment, he also saw the change in Matthew's expression. Originally, he was still grimacing in fear, but when the Draken crashed into the oak tree, all the fear on Matthew's face disappeared. In its place, there was only terrifying coldness and intense killing intent. How dare you injure my tree? Matthew was furious. His mind reacted, and then he charged at the Draken Swordmaster. When the Draken saw the Necromancer coming towards him, he was stunned. Then, he raised the magic sword in his hand in ecstasy. In a flash, a gust of cold wind came from behind him. The Draken, who had focused all his attention on Matthew because of his partner's tragic death, did not notice that a cunning and huge fellow had already sneaked behind him. Boom! The skeletal dragon's huge claws mercilessly slapped the Draken's back. The latter staggered. He did not even manage to hold on to the demonic sword properly, and his lower body was firmly pinned to the ground by the dragon. Just as he endured the pain and wanted to reach for his demonic sword, the Necromancer had already rushed in front of him. The Draken struggled violently. However, the other party had already bent down and placed that terrifying hand on his head. Unforgivable. This was the last thing the Draken heard before he died. Hint. Pale Hand has killed and captured a high quality soul, level 14. The effect is increasing. Attack range plus 1.5 meters, current attack range is 2.5 meters, instant death check effectiveness slightly increased, obtain a small amount of lifesteal effect. After killing the Draken, Matthew's anger subsided slightly. He quickly put away the magic sword, battle flag, and giant axe, then called 2 zombies to drag the 2 corpses away. The town guards who had returned to the defense team were speechless when they saw this scene. On the battlefield, the Underground Alliance army had lost their incomparably brave duo. The Underground Alliance army was quickly defeated. There was no need for others to take action. The Silvermoon zombies, which occasionally emitted a withering light, easily drove the kobolds and gnolls away. But Matthew did not slack off. He tidied himself up and climbed onto the skeletal dragon's back, finding a comfortable position to stand. Let's go. Under Matthew's orders, Phyle aggressively charged into the battlefield. Wherever the dragons might reach, the underground creatures scattered and fled. However, most of them were mercilessly killed by the bone dragon. If there were any that slipped through the onslaught, they died at Matthew's hands. He simply stood on the back of the bone dragon and stretched out his right hand. A steady stream of death notifications came from Matthew's system. Just like that. The man and the dragon were like harvesters on the battlefield. A large number of underground creatures died. The battle gradually died down. On the eastern front. Sinwak, Lara, what the hell are you doing? Anderson, who was being held down by Blake and the others, almost collapsed when he turned around and saw the situation on the battlefield. He angrily hammered Blake away with his mace and let out a raving roar. However, what made his blood pressure explode was the troll Sinwak was still sleeping soundly at the entrance of the cave. And the drow warrior Lara was already missing. Damn it. Damn it. You're all trash. Anderson waved his mace crazily. Blake and the others were shocked by his madness and moved away. Even the gnolls behind Anderson did not dare to approach their leader, who had completely gone berserk. At this moment, a shadow the size of a small mountain rushed over from the battlefield. Phyle carried Matthew and broke through the formation of the underground creatures. Then, it charged towards Anderson without stopping. Dragon's Might. As soon as he got close, Phyle tactfully took the initiative to release his Dragon's Might. Anderson's resistance was very strong. However, in the face of the targeted Dragon's Might, he still couldn't be completely immune to it. At the crucial moment, Zeller also sent an assist. He cast a powerful paralysis spell from afar. Anderson's muscles began to tremble. Seizing this opportunity, Phyle directly pressed its huge body onto it. Rumble. The skeletal dragon's body crushed the Gnoll Evil Art Master's body like a mountain. Anderson's head was still stuck out from the mountain of bones. Matthew strode over. He activated Pale Hand from 2 meters away. A grayish-brown hand of negative energy extended from Matthew's right hand and pressed down on Anderson's head. Under the thick aura of death, he instinctively trembled. Then, he burst into uncontrollable laughter. I am immortal. Hearing this, Matthew was unmoved. He asked with a playful expression, is that so? As soon as he finished speaking, under Anderson's terrified gaze, a faint white light appeared in the eastern sky. No, this is impossible. Anderson struggled violently, but the skeletal dragon's weight was heavy. No matter how hard he tried, he could not move. No one immos the sunrise time in Rolling Stone Town better than me. You're too late. Matthew smiled. At the end of the day, midnight will pass. As he spoke, he lowered his right hand. It completely pressed down on Anderson's head. Anderson screamed. The scream lasted for about 10 seconds. Anderson's face was filled with despair and fear, but it gradually turned into bewilderment. The smile on Matthew's face was slightly stiff. I am immune to instant death. Anderson was ecstatic. At this moment, Zeller's paralysis effect was about to wear off. The Gnoll Evil Art Master once again displayed his almost abnormal physique. Boom! Anderson actually stood up while carrying the bone dragon. I am immune. Anderson turned his head abruptly, trying to break free from the restraints of the pale hand. He instantly made preparations to retreat. At the critical moment, the pale hand twitched violently again. In the blink of an eye, it had drained Anderson's exuberant vitality. Anderson, who had just had a glimmer of hope, knelt down with his eyes wide open. They were lifeless. At the same time, the morning light in the east finally broke through the darkness and pierced the human world. A loud and clear cry came from that direction. Everyone could vaguely see it. A giant eagle seemed to be flying towards them from the sun. There was a bald figure sitting on its back. A few kilometers away from the battlefield. A team of well-trained cavalrymen was passing through the oak forest at high speed. The person at the front was the Lord, who was filled with fighting intent. Our companions are ahead, our families are being threatened by evil creatures, and our territory is being trampled by the enemy. The Suki family would never give up on any of their citizens or let go of any of their enemies. We've been at peace for too long. Perhaps we've already forgotten what kind of excellent warriors we are. It doesn't matter because we're going to start a massacre tonight. We need to let the outside world know what will happen to those reckless underground creatures if they provoke the enemy they shouldn't. On this land. We are the people they can't afford to offend. Now, the enemy is right in front of us. Everyone, please follow me. Accompanied by Rieger's extremely provocative, angry roars. The knights rushed out of the oak forest with high morale. Kill them. Rieger rushed to the front with red eyes. But in the next second, his movements suddenly slowed down. Because the battlefield in front of him was not how he had imagined it at all. There was not a strong enemy army. He only saw undead creatures scattered across the vast wasteland. At the forefront of the undead, a tall and thin figure was riding on a bone dragon, chasing after the remaining underground creatures and killing them. Chapter 84. 84, Divine Dragon Sex Disciple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 84. Divine Dragon Sex Disciple. Translator. Lonely Tree. You're late, Rieger. Of course, so am I. A voice full of energy sounded in Rieger's ears. Upon hearing this voice, a smile appeared on Rieger's face. He turned around and hugged the newcomer. Due to his heavy armor, he could only symbolically hug the other party's waist. Welcome back, Weiqi Li. Rieger patted his back sincerely. Then, he couldn't help but touch the other party's smooth forehead. The feeling is still the same as before, huh? If you dare to lay your hands on an evil monk who worships evil Queen Baba Shah or Dusk Creator Galen, I can guarantee that your brains will be blown out. The warrior monk who came with the Eastern Eagle showed a helpless smile. But you touched the head of Li Weiqi, so he can only roll his eyes at you. It's good to see you. Rieger looked at Li Weiqi with a sigh. You haven't changed much from 10 years ago. Is this the help of Qi? Li Weiqi smiled and said, Qi may be able to slow down aging, but following the precepts is the secret to eternal youth. As he spoke, his gaze turned to the battlefield in the distance. To be honest, I couldn't believe that there would be a necromancer in your army. Rieger's face darkened. This is an accident. He's not my subordinate. To some extent, he made my pre-war declaration a joke. Necromancers being annoying are not without reason. Li Weiqi asked curiously, you can't say that. If you had such a necromancer with you when you were exploring the purgatory, you would have suffered much less damage. Rieger was silent for a moment, and then he snorted. That's why it's even more annoying, isn't it? Let's not talk about this. When you went to the east to search for the legendary path, how was your harvest? Li Weiqi said calmly, I once climbed a lonely peak that was as tall as the 10 million meters and played with giant turtles and whales at the bottom of the sea, but I never found the trace I wanted. However, I've gained quite a lot along the way. Perhaps my strength hasn't increased, but my soul has been greatly satisfied. Rieger revealed a gloating smile. So your strength is still at the 4th tier like mine. Li Weiqi glanced at him. Pretty much. It's only 4 levels higher than tier 4. This time, it was Rieger's turn to roll his eyes. Hey, how could you two forget the real hero? The Eastern Giant Eagle transformed into a human and interrupted unhappily. To be honest, Huo-1, your flying speed might not be comparable to my divine steps. Li Weiqi said seriously, if you let me come back alone, I might have arrived sooner. The druid Hoven immediately became anxious. Do you think divine steps can allow you to run 3,000 miles? I let you ride me for a day and a night, and this is how you treat me. Li Weiqi, there must be something wrong with your training and commandments. Li Weiqi joked, there is no such thing as taking care of a small animal's self-esteem in my commandments. Huo Wen immediately turned into a sparrow and pecked at his head. However, Li Weiqi's bald head was undamaged. The sparrow pecked for a long time and almost pecked its mouth sore. Rhaegar snickered at the side. It wasn't until Zeller walked over that the fight that didn't match their age came to an end. Pay attention to your status and image. You are no longer the youths from 20 to 30 years ago. Zeller smiled and hugged Li Weiqi. The latter immediately said emotionally, "Oh, Zeller, you are still so handsome and charming. Resisting your charm is probably the hardest commandment of mine to keep. Li, your flattery is still so lame, stiff, and even a little disgusting. Leonard na gusums all over ms race. Huo Wen is right. I have never seen a monk who loves to talk more than you." Li Weiqi spread his hands. Is there a possibility that you have seen too few monks? Huo Wen stepped on Li Weiqi's head and flapped his wings. It's rare for everyone to gather together. We must have a good drink. Li Weiqi is treating. Li Weiqi took out his empty pocket. My commandments forbid me from drinking, and my commandments have made me poor. Rhaegar shook his head. What a pity. It seems that only the three of us can drink. Li Weiqi blinked. For this occasion, I could break my commandments. The four of them pushed and laughed for a while. Meeting again after so many years. They were clearly old people from a turbid world. However, in front of the comrades who had fought side by side in the past, everyone saw the shadows of each other when they were young. It was as if they had returned to their high-spirited teenage years. No worries, no reservations, no burdens. There was only the hope that tomorrow would be better, on the battlefield. Matthew rode on the bone dragon and waved his pale hand wantonly. This thing could increase its effect by killing people. It was just that killing low-level enemies would only increase his strength slightly. Even so. Now, the attack range of the pale hand had reached 5.6 meters. This meant that Matthew could ride on the back of the bone dragon and sweep the enemies below easily, like cleaning up the minions. Matthew did not forget to keep his eyes and ears open. The arrival of the Eastern Eagle and the monk, as well as the reinforcements from Rhaegar, did not escape his attention. However, what happened next left Matthew confused. He had thought that these people would come over to help. But they were catching up outside the forest. Matthew could even hear their laughter. Are they embarrassed to steal my kills? Or do they think there's no need to make a move? Matthew pondered for a moment. But at this moment, he suddenly found a dense group of shadows at the entrance of the mine. Are there more underground creatures? Matthew's heart skipped a beat. He might be riding Filey, but in fact, he was already at the end of his rope. If there were another wave of enemies, he would immediately turn around and hand the situation over to Rhaegar. However, this time, the underground creatures that appeared at the entrance of the mine seemed to be afraid. They wandered around the area for a while. Pairs of red eyes were fixed on Matthew and the skeletal dragon. Both sides had a faint intention of confrontation. At this moment, a clear dragon's roar suddenly came from behind Matthew. Whoosh! A wave of air brushed past the edge of the bone dragon. The dragon's roar rushed to the entrance of the mine along with the air. The underground creatures were all knocked down to the floor. Very quickly, the new wave of underground creatures began to retreat. Their figures quickly disappeared into the cave. Matthew heaved a sigh of relief. His gaze couldn't help but glance at the data panel. Hint. You have encountered Monk, Divine Dragon Sex Disciple, Li Weiqi, level 20. Li Weiqi used the Dragon Roar Airwave to force back the new underground coalition army. the mine leads to the underground area named Underdark. It seems that Dev are acting UD again. A deep voice sounded behind Matthew. The bald warrior monk was flying over. His steps were strange and did not seem fast, but in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived near Matthew. Behind him, Rhaegar and the others were also approaching quickly. Matthew got off the bone dragon and went up to him. "Hello, you can call me Li Weiqi." The other party took the initiative to extend his right hand to Matthew as a symbol of friendship. "Young Necromancer, I feel in you the love for nature. You are the most peculiar necromancer I have ever seen, the inheritor of the path of necromancy." Matthew subconsciously reached over. "You can call me Matthew." Unexpectedly, Li Weiqi shrank back. "I heard that necromancers are very friendly, but there's no need to greet others with instant death spells." Matthew smiled apologetically and switched to his left hand. Li Weiqi smiled and held his hand, then patted his shoulder in a friendly manner. "I'm just kidding. I've already cultivated the diamond body and am immune to all instant death spells." At this moment, Rhaegar and Zeller also walked over. After a brief introduction, the two of them exchanged glances. Matthew found out that other than the half-legend, Li Weiqi, the druid Huo, who could transform into the great eagle of the east, was also the son of a demigod. However, due to some special circumstances, the current Huo could no longer participate in the battle. "The enemy has not been completely eliminated. They were only scared away by me." Li Weiqi looked at the entrance of the cave and said, "I can feel the evil approaching. Perhaps some force in the abyss is stirring." Rhaegar and the others revealed a solemn expression. Just as everyone was thinking. But Li Weiqi had already strode into the cave. "I'll give them a small warning." As he spoke, his figure disappeared into the cave. He went in alone. Doesn't he need help?" Matthew could not help but ask. "He always likes to act alone." Zeller explained, "Don't worry, Li will be fine. He's the most special monk, but very strong." Rhaegar, who was standing at the side, looked at Matthew with a complicated expression. "You surprised me. I didn't expect you to be able to kill the enemy alone and save our people from losses. I'm very grateful to you. So, is there anything you need help with?" Matthew thought for a moment. "Clean up the battlefield and move the corpses." Rhaegar's face sank, but he still agreed. "Oh, right, I also want to build a cemetery under the forest. You know, I have a lot of undead creatures under me now." Matthew scratched his head in embarrassment. Rhaegar's face turned completely black. He replied unhappily, "That is your private land. You don't have to tell me what you want to do." Matthew was even more embarrassed. "What I mean is that I don't have that much money and manpower." Rhaegar looked at Matthew in disbelief. Zeller reminded the two of them at the right time. Matthew guarded Rolling Stone Town alone. Rhaegar turned around and walked away at a clear path. "How much money and manpower do you need? You can discuss it with Zeller." Matthew stopped Rhaegar in time. "Wait, there's one more thing." He pointed at the source of the snoring and reminded him, "There's another troll there. He's an important member of the Order of Calamity. I don't know what to do with him." The group walked around the troll. "I think I have a way to wake him up." Huo, who had returned to his human form, took out a pitch-black medicine bottle from somewhere. He pulled out the cork. An extremely smelly gas gushed out. The rest of them took a few steps back. Even the sleeping troll was sneezing from the smell. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and straightened half of his body. Everyone immediately took out their weapons, their faces full of vigilance. What happened? The troll looked at everyone in confusion. "Your army has been defeated like a mountain." Rhaegar shouted, "Your companions have already been killed by us." However, the troll's face was filled with joy. So, am I captured? Rhaegar was stunned for a moment, then said with certainty, exactly. Bang! The troll suddenly lay on the ground. That's great. Sinwak has been captured, and Sinwak can have a good sleep. A few seconds later. Under everyone's shocked and complicated gazes. The thunderous snoring sounded again. Chapter 85. 85, Spoils of War. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 85. Spoils of War. Translator. Lonely Tree. Everyone looked at each other. Rhaegar was about to draw his sword, but he put it back halfway. He looked at Matthew. It's up to you to decide how to deal with it. Everything on this battlefield is your spoils of war, including the captives. You should have the right to deal with them. This sentence was equivalent to the official deciding the distribution of tonight's results. Matthew was not surprised. Putting aside the fact that he hated necromancers and female slaves, Rhaegar was indeed an upright and fair lord. However, Matthew had not thought of how to deal with this big-hearted troll. He circled Sinwak 3 times. The latter snored like thunder and had no sense of crisis. I can kill him for you, Rhaegar suggested. Matthew shook his head. I think a living troll might be more valuable. I want to train him. Rhaegar shrugged. Then you'd better watch him until he dies. He might be sleeping soundly now, but when he wakes up, especially when he's hungry, he'll be a very troublesome threat. Matthew agreed with Rhaegar. Trolls were indeed dangerous and evil creatures. Perhaps it was easier to control them as undead creatures, but he felt that the troll in front of him was not that bad. He was just a little too fat. Can you do me a favor? Matthew looked at Zeller with a questioning gaze. I plan to build a prison for the troll, but before that, I can't control him. Zeller nodded and replied, this is not difficult. As he spoke, he took out his wand from his waist and aimed it at the sleeping troll. Crackle. Crackle. After a short incantation, a bolt of lightning shot out from the tip of the wand and struck the troll's head. However, the latter had no reaction. Zeller wasn't discouraged. He repeated the incantation 3 times. When the 4th bolt of lightning struck Sinwak, the troll suddenly woke up and shouted, who's touching Sinwak's butt? As soon as he finished speaking, his huge body shrank rapidly. Soon, it turned into a lively frog. Here. Zeller skillfully grabbed the frog, stuffed it into a glass bottle, and gave it to Matthew. My malicious transfiguration can last for 24 days, but during this period, this glass bottle cannot be broken, and he cannot come into contact with any living thing. Matthew nodded as he carefully took the bottle. What do you plan to do with him? Zeller asked curiously. Matthew thought for a moment. I haven't thought about it yet. Perhaps we can use him to build the cemetery. After dealing with the threat of the troll, the only thing left in the north of the oak forest was to clean up the battlefield. Rhaegar ordered his men to set up a monitoring station near the mine entrance. He planned to explore the underground space of the Gold Digger Basin in the next few days to prevent underground creatures from infiltrating Rolling Stone Town from other exits. These jobs had nothing to do with Matthew. At this moment, he was commanding the skeletons, zombies, and living people to move the corpses and count the spoils of war. Rhaegar had already given the order. Matthew planned to leave a portion of the spoils of war for the people who participated in the battle, including Zeller, Blake, and Eli. The rest would be his. He did a rough count. First of all, the income in cash exceeded 1,500 gold coins. This was based on the fact that most of the kobolds and gnolls were poor. The Order of Calamity wasn't rich either. The main reason was that Matthew had killed too many people this time. Next was equipment and weapons. Matthew had gotten a lot of good stuff from the 3 Tier 4 threats. Rooster War Flag. This item can increase the morale of the group and the vision and strength of the flag bearer. At the same time, it can activate a small area healing halo. Growler. It's that two-handed axe. It has the effects of unstoppable force, wound tear, and spirit-slaying weapon. It's a melee weapon and can be sold for a good price in Jade Court or Bai Yen City. There was also a small piece of adamantine on the axe. It was not impossible to remove it if it was melted. After all, adamantine and mithril were rare metals that spellcasters were very eager for. Rhinoceros leather shorts. It was also taken from the body of the Boorman. This pair of pants is light and tough and can provide far more armor value than ordinary leather armor. The only flaw is that the size is a little big. One side of the shorts can fit 2 Matthews. Demon Sword Scalona, and Cursed Warrior's Teachings. A good magic sword and a small booklet found on the body of the Draken. The latter also recorded the inheritance method of the Cursed Warrior. However, one needed to go to the underground to complete the inheritance quest. Aside from the Cursed Warrior class, it seemed that only people with psychic abilities could use the demon sword. Ring of Desire. It was taken from the body of the Draken. Its name is Desire, but its actual effect is abstinence. The wearer will gradually lose the urge to reproduce. In addition, it provides 10 dark vision. Matthew tried it, and the effect was not bad. It meant that there was no need for lighting in a completely dark environment. Cursed Hammer. The main weapon of the Noel Anderson. It is of excellent quality, but the negative effect is that the wielder loses 2 points of agility and gains points of strength. It is also a rare item for some melee classes. Scroll of the Void was a sealed magic book that could only be opened by the members of the Order of Calamity with a unique spell. Anti-Magic Stone, Magic Contract. This stone can be used to cast the instant magic counter once a day. This seemingly ordinary stone is actually a magic contract between the warlock and the master, symbolizing the cooperation between the two. Matthew had to muster up a lot of courage to take this stone. Regardless of whether it was the great evil demon Trier or the Midnight God, he had already offended them, so he didn't care if he offended them to the end. The only concern was whether the other party would be able to locate him through this stone. However, on second thought, the location of the oak forest had long been exposed. He would be guarding this place for the time being, so the location was not important. If the Order of Calamity still refused to give up, then let them come. Finally, the most valuable spoils of war for Matthew were the corpses of more than 300 gnolls and kobolds, as well as the corpses of 3 Tier 4 adventurers. Even 300 cannon fodder corpses were enough to create a negative energy pool of rebirth in the cemetery. This directly changed the ecology of the cemetery. Matthew decided that after the number of skeletons reached the limit, the remaining corpses would be used as materials to fill the pool of rebirth. High-level corpses were even more useful. It could be buried in exchange for a gift of nature, or it could be used to create dark warriors or death knights. It's a pity that the Dark Warrior can only be made at the 4th tier. I've mastered the Undying Domain in advance, so I should be able to try it at the 3rd tier. Matthew knew that his advancement was imminent. Fortunately, the double harvest effect was about to end. Now, he finally had time to arrange matters related to the advancement. As for which of the 3 corpses would be used as a gift and which would be used to make dark warriors, Matthew was still unsure. He planned to properly store them. He would make a choice when the time was right. However, just as Matthew was dealing with the body, he was surprised to find that evil art master Anderson's head had disappeared. He squatted down and carefully examined the wound on the corpse. He found that the wound on the head was smooth. The technique of the head cutter was definitely perfect. The first thing that popped up in Matthew's mind was the appearance of the Drow warrior, who had disappeared. Did she steal Anderson's head? It can't be that this fellow can be resurrected, right? Matthew frowned. He was not afraid of Anderson's comeback, but he was afraid of the Drow warrior's ability to appear and disappear. Anderson's corpse was surrounded by the garrison and a few circles of zombies. Since the other party could steal Anderson's head without him knowing, it meant that she could launch a similar sneak attack. Matthew immediately ordered the Bone Dragon to activate blind detection. Unfortunately, Filey had walked around the entire place but found nothing. It seems that while I was cleaning up the mess, she stole Anderson's head and immediately ran away. Matthew felt a little regretful. Anderson's corpse was originally the best material to make a Dark Knight. If it became a headless horseman, he would have to find him a mount. Forget it. It's too troublesome. Let's just bury it. Matthew picked up the shovel skillfully. He buried the gnoll's body under an oak tree. A gnoll was buried in spring. What would nature give him? Matthew was looking forward to it. After dealing with all kinds of spoils of war, Matthew finally had the time to cast his gaze into the data panel. Hint. You have successfully completed a small scale battle and returned with a great victory. You have obtained the elements of the battle domain I. Strategy, hand-to-hand combat, probing, and counterattacking. Accumulate more elements, and you will have the opportunity to enter the battle domain. After tonight, the terrifying Pale Hand would spread widely in the form of rumors. Your regional legend, Rolling Stone Town/Underdark, +1 your faction legend, Order of Wither/Order of Calamity, +L the accumulation of elements and legendary points meant that Matthew had taken another steady step on the path of legendary. However, his gains tonight were not limited to this. Maintenance is also very important, follow on mission 2. Tonight, Vaughn have successfully stopped the invasion of the Order of Calamity and the Underdark Coalition against the Oak Forest. You have received the reward, Shape-Shifting Transformation IL. Wilderness Transformation IL. You can choose a new animal as your new shape-shifting form. Nightblade Lynx, Albatross, Brown Bear, Moonlight Enhancement. Chapter 86. 86. Training the Same Race. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 86. Training the Same Race. Translator. Lonely Tree. Looking at the three new forms, Matthew fell into deep thought. His gaze was mainly on the Nightblade Lynx and the Brown Bear. The Albatross was not bad, but Matthew already had a Raven, so it was naturally the first to be excluded. Between the remaining two, if the Moonlight Society's exclusive enhancement description was not behind the Brown Bear, the Nightblade Lynx was undoubtedly a more tempting choice. Not only were these creatures agile and natural predators, they also had the ability to sneak and cast spells. Running fast had always been an attribute that Matthew paid more attention to. It was a pity. We can't just ignore the goddess of moonlight. Matthew hesitated for a while and finally chose the Brown Bear. Hint. You have obtained the Wild Brown Bear form, Moonlight Enhancement. Your wild form has received the blessing of the goddess of moonlight, Asha. The Brown Bear has been renamed as Moon Bear. Compared to ordinary brown bears, moon bears have the following additional advantages. Moon Bear's strength and constitution +1. Bathed in the moonlight, the Moon Bear's running speed was twice as fast as usual. The Moon Bear had gained instinct casting, Vine spell. Moon bears are very attractive, so it is easier for them to attract the opposite sex. The Moon Bear gained the abilities of suppression, intimidation, and capture. The Moonlight Society is stronger than I thought. Matthew was glad that he had made the right choice again. Not only were the Moon Bears powerful, but they could also run fast under the moonlight. Their looks were not good, but their instinct casting was amazing. The called instinct casting referred to some wild beasts and monsters who had not experienced spellcasting training. They relied on bloodline awakening or a chance to obtain a specific spellcasting ability. It was similar to an animal version of a warlock. The difference was that instinct casting did not consume mana, and there was almost no casting throw. The casting method was also very close to instantaneous and silent casting. Therefore, the instinct casting was perfect for ambushes. Just by looking at the text description, Matthew could imagine a set of vine spell to trap the enemy and suppress them. The moon bear's basic attributes were extraordinary. He finally had the ability to fight in close combat. The only pity was that the pale hand could not be used in the wilderness form. Otherwise, the enemy would be able to taste the negative energy bear paw. Until dawn. Only then did the people in the north of the oak forest gradually become sparse. Since Matthew did not allow logging in the oak forest, Rhaegar had to go to the logging yard in the farm area to gather wood. However, he was efficient. At dawn, the sentry post at the monitoring station had already taken shape. Matthew commanded the zombies to hide the corpses in a huge underground cave. He planned to use the negative energy stone to build a ceiling array to store the corpses. This was obviously not a small project. Fortunately, zombies were much more capable than skeletons. At least Matthew's blood pressure didn't increase when he was ordering them. Later, Matthew saw a young man in a black jailer's uniform running hurriedly from the town. He looked a little anxious. Did something happen again? Matthew quietly went over. My lord. Not good. As expected, the young man reported with a bitter expression, last night, the 3 prisoners of the Silver Frost Brotherhood secretly dug a tunnel and escaped. Hearing this, Matthew, Zeller, and Rhaegar all had serious expressions. The Silver Frost Brotherhood was full of ruthless arsonists. After they escaped from prison, they would definitely do something bad. Was there a fire in the town last night? Rhaegar asked seriously. The young man thought for a moment. I don't think so. At least I didn't hear of any fire on my way here. The 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief. Rhaegar wanted to ask again. Unexpectedly, another person in the garrison uniform ran over from the direction of the town. The man panted and said, reporting to my lord. We found a group of people in the drainage ditch in the craftsman area. Their hands were tied with a rope. They clearly had room to move, but they didn't dare to move. Later, after the vice-captain's verification, he found out that a few of them were villains who were wanted by several nearby cities. They seemed to be members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood. The young man from before widened his eyes in disbelief. He couldn't help but ask, is there a total of 3 people? Later, that person shook his head and said, not only that, there are a total of 9 of them, and one of them is even crippled. He then asked Rhaegar, my lord, what should we do now? Should we lock them all up in prison? When the 3 of them heard the report, they all had strange expressions. I'll handle it. Zeller whistled, and the horse that was resting at the side heard him. He mounted the horse and headed in the direction of the town. There were indeed a few members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood in the group of the Order of Calamity yesterday. Matthew speculated, they should have gone to prison, but why were they tied up after they successfully escaped? Rhaegar did not take it to heart. He glanced at Matthew and said meaningfully, this is what happens when you offend someone you shouldn't. Coincidentally, there are quite a few people in Rolling Stone Town that you shouldn't offend. The image of the elegant gentleman Richard immediately appeared in Matthew's mind. So, how do you plan to deal with them? We can't keep locking them up forever. Matthew looked curiously at Rhaegar. Rhaegar waved his hand and walked away as if he was unwilling to talk to Matthew. However, his voice still floated over. Of course, it's to collect the bounty. I've already sent someone to inform Jade Court that their shadow leopard is on the way. Sometimes, clearing bounties can be a good business. Cleaning up the battlefield and storing the corpses was a big project. Even with the help of the zombies and the garrison, it took Matthew 3 days to temporarily arrange these precious spoils of war. During this time, the state of double harvest had entered its final countdown. Matthew's planting of trees naturally began to accelerate. 4 days later. Hint. Your temporary state of double harvest has ended. During this period, you have planted 452 trees in total. Your nature affinity has been greatly improved. Remaining number of strengthening. 7. After the 4-hour deadline of the banishment letter, Matthew summoned Soldier back. With this 4th-tier sword dancer by his side, his sense of security doubled. Right now, he was going to strengthen Soldier for the last time. To what extent could it reach? It all depended on Soldier's luck and Matthew's. Unfortunately, the luck that Lulu gave me has disappeared. Moreover, after that blessing, she seemed to have suffered a great loss. I haven't seen her for the past few days. Matthew took a deep breath and began to strengthen without saying anything. The result was unsettling. First, he leveled up to level 15. Following that, the keywords were also released one after another. Train Clansman, Purple. Your summoned soldier has mastered the skill of training his own kind. The skeleton soldiers trained by Soldier will have a certain chance to obtain the assassin profession and a very low chance to obtain the blade dancer profession. After long-term training, the overall strength of the skeleton soldiers will be significantly improved. Bad direction, Gray. In non-combat mode, there is a certain probability that Soldier will get lost. Training his own kind is still okay. I now have 120 skeleton soldiers for him to train. Maybe he can create a skeleton assassin team. Matthew's eyes lit up. As for his poor sense of direction, in his opinion, Soldier's intelligence was not enough to support him to move alone. As long as he kept following him, he would not get lost, right? Matthew was quite satisfied with the first 3 keywords. However, the next 3 keywords gave him a head-on blow. Dual Blade Attack, Blue. Your summoned creature will gain additional proficiency points when using dual blades. Beginner Horsemanship, White. Your summoned creature has mastered horsemanship. There is a certain chance for it to become a cavalryman with a mount. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, Gray. In a non-combat state, Soldier will show slight obsessive-compulsive disorder tendencies. Blue, white and gray. Was this better? Matthew glanced at it one last time, disheartened. However, this time, what appeared in front of his eyes was a flash of golden light. Domain, Shadow. Your summoned creature has obtained the qualifications to enter the Shadow Domain. It has obtained the following abilities. Shadow Slingshot, Soldier can use the energy slingshot to move quickly in the Shadow Realm. Shadow Kill, Soldier can hide in any shadow and launch a surprise attack on the enemy. Power of Domain, Soldier can activate the Shadow Domain, which will shock and repel the enemy. It was actually a domain. Matthew stared at Soldier for more than 10 seconds. However, this guy was so confused that he thought Matthew wanted to see him dance. Without saying a word, he twisted his hips with all his might. Can you share your domain with me? Matthew asked. Soldier was stunned. Matthew patiently communicated for a long time, but Soldier still looked confused. Matthew didn't know if he was pretending or if he really couldn't share. In the end, the friendly exchange between the master and servant ended with Matthew giving up. At this point, Soldier's strength had been determined. Level 15, wielding the power of the Shadow Domain, wielding extremely strong assassination abilities, and being able to train his own kind. This meant that Soldier had the template to become a lord or a hero. He was already able to contend with Filey. The only flaw was that there were a series of gray keywords. But overall, Matthew was still satisfied and gratified. At least there weren't any raise salary keywords, right? At night. It was beyond Matthew's expectations. This time, the latter was here to ask for his leave. After this battle, I deeply realized my own shortcomings. Perhaps I shouldn't wait for the change of seasons. Now, I'm going to kill that ice dragon. Eli said solemnly, I apologize for my recklessness at the beginning. I almost missed out on a true friend of nature because of my prejudice. That night, I witnessed your reaction when the draken into a tree. At that moment, I saw endless anger in your eyes. Only those who truly place nature at the top would have such a reaction. Matthew, my friend, you are the true guardian of the oak forest. I couldn't help you this time. When I become a Tier 4 shapeshifter, I'll come back and fulfill my promise. Seeing his determination, Matthew didn't ask him to stay. He only said some words of blessing and planned to get him more food. Who knew that at this moment? Eli suddenly looked shy. He whispered in embarrassment, "Before I leave, I have a request." Matthew nodded and said, "Please speak." Eli asked expectantly, "Can I see Peggy? I want to personally praise and thank her for her cooking." "Oh, I guess she must be a very beautiful woman, right?" Chapter 87. 87, I am Peggy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 87. I am Peggy. Translator. Lonely Tree Matthew tried to be as tactful as possible as he looked at Eli's eager gaze. Peggy is indeed a woman with a pure heart, but sometimes, keeping a trace of mystery may be a better way to get along. Eli understood Matthew's meaning. He was a little dissatisfied. "I thought that after these days together, even if you and I are not friends, at least not strangers." Matthew hurriedly smiled and said, "As long as you agree, Eli, we will be friends forever." Eli's expression softened. "Since we're friends, why did you stop me from seeing Peggy?" As he spoke, he suddenly revealed an expression of realization. "Could it be that Peggy is your lover? Then I'm indeed a little rude, but don't worry. I just want to see her. I definitely have no intention of snatching her away. After all, I've been there before. I know how painful that feeling is. I won't let you suffer that kind of pain." The smile on Matthew's face froze. "No, no, Peggy is not my lover, and I'm not stopping you from seeing her out of selfish desires." Eli was surprised. "Then why are you so unwilling to let me see Peggy?" Matthew was about to explain when a tall figure suddenly walked over in a hurry. "Matthew! Hurry up and look at my chest. Come, come, touch. Did I lose some bones?" The Tauran skeleton walked over casually. Taking advantage of the situation, he forcefully pushed Eli to the side. Eli looked displeased, but before he could say anything, the strange skeleton shouted at him, "Little kitty, don't look so unhappy. I heard you secretly talking about me behind my back." Eli was amused. He was just about to say that he was talking about Miss Peggy. But in the next second, he heard Matthew's helpless voice. "All right, Peggy, stop fooling around. Didn't I check for you the other day? It's just a few broken ribs, but I've already helped you reattach them. With your physique, you'll be able to recover in a while." Peggy obviously didn't believe it. She covered her chest with one hand and reached under her ribs with the other. After a while, she shook her head and said, "All right, even if the ribs have been reattached, I still feel my butt hurting. Hurry up and help me check it." As soon as he finished speaking, the dumbfounded Eli finally reacted. He asked, tongue-tied, "She's Peggy?" The Tauran skeleton said proudly, "I am Peggy." Matthew had a hint of pity on his face. "Yes. Meet Peggy. Underdark, Blood Light Pool. The location of the Order of Calamity's sanctuary." In front of the door of an ordinary white house, there was a burning brazier on both sides of the house. The brazier was burning without any substance, and occasionally, a painful and twisted face would flash in the fire. On the steps, a golden-haired man with a genial smile was facing the drow warrior with a vigilant face. He gently opened his arms to the drow warrior, and there was a power in his voice that could move people's hearts. "Welcome back to the Holy Church, my daughter Lara." As he spoke, he leaned his arms forward, signaling Lara to come over and hug him. Lara's eyelids twitched slightly. She reluctantly walked over and hugged the man gently before separating. Her body movements were full of resistance, and there was even a deep fear in the depths of her pupils. Father, this operation has failed. Medes and Banwen have died in the enemy's hands, and Sinwak is suspected to have been captured. I followed Father's orders and only brought back Anderson's head. As she spoke, she held her head tightly in her arms and respectfully handed it over. Only the head. Lara's body trembled. She hurriedly lowered her head and said, "That group of people is keeping a close eye on them. The strength of Rolling Stone Town is above our estimation. That necromancer is very cunning." Anderson was unable to counter his spells, nor did he have the chance to banish his bone dragon. They have a lot of people, and they're guarding the place closely. I can't bring back Anderson's corpse, so I can only settle for the next best option. I'm sorry, this defeat is unavoidable. Even if I were to intervene, I wouldn't be able to change the situation. The golden-haired man shook his head. We did not fail. Lara looked up in surprise and saw a sincere smile on his face. My lord said that he was very happy and that his initial goal had been achieved. Lara was confused. But we were indeed defeated. The golden-haired man smiled and said, "A temporary victory or defeat is just fleeting. More importantly, war is only a means, not an end. We have to hurry up and prepare for the next mission. This is the best way to repay our Lord's generous grace." Lara heaved a sigh of relief and quickly said obediently, "I see. I'll go to the Black Dragon City to persuade them." No rush. The golden-haired man smiled. Everyone is dead, and you are the only one left alive. Although this is my order to you, you still have to be punished. Not for me, but for your dead companions. Lara suddenly raised her head, her eyes filled with fear and unwillingness. Pearl-like beads of sweat instantly appeared on her forehead. "Father," she moaned softly. "What, are you unwilling?" The golden-haired man was still smiling. Under the light of the fire, his shadow was stretched infinitely, forming a ferocious and terrifying outline on the stone wall. "No, I'm willing." Lara gritted her teeth for a long time and finally said, "Come, let's go in." The blonde man gently held her hand. The two of them walked into the wooden house that was painted white. Very quickly, an extremely shrill female voice came from the house. Vaguely, one could even hear the blonde man's gentle teachings. "You should be happy, Lara. It's a father's love. You should be happy. The present is a gift from our Lord. Laugh. Laugh loudly. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I can stuff this spine into your body in time." Very quickly, outside the wooden house, the mournful voice turned into a faint laughter. An underground squirrel passed by in a daze. It curiously leaned on the window of the wooden house and looked around. There was a crisp sound. A ferocious tentacle extended from an unknown place. When the sticky tentacle disappeared, there was only a shallow blood stain on the window. The hysterical laughter in the room. It continued. Northeast of the oak forest, Matthew stood near a marker stone with a serious expression. Behind him were a few guards with shocked expressions. The group was actually still some distance away from the marker stone, but they did not dare to approach it anymore. This was because they felt a terrifying destructive power. The scar of the dead has spread, and it's spreading abnormally. It's stronger than before. Matthew's eyes were solemn. At the time of the incident, he was building a temporary cemetery in the cave with a few teammates. Suddenly he sensed an evil movement when he followed his senses to this place. He discovered that the scar of the dead had not only spread to the southwest, but the activity of a certain existence within it had also increased significantly. The oak tree that Matthew had planted here was originally 30 to 40 meters away from the scar of the dead. But now, The tree was almost stuck to the scorched earth of the scar of the dead. Under the influence of destructive power. The oak tree was already showing signs of decay. Although it would not die immediately, it would definitely be difficult for it to survive over time. What the hell? Why did the scar of the dead spread out of nowhere? Matthew's mind was full of doubts. Then he remembered a strange thing that he had encountered while cleaning up the corpses over the past few days. Matthew realized that the more than 300 corpses, whether they were gnolls, kobolds, imps, all looked more like dried corpses. There was no water and no blood. When Matthew first discovered the anomaly, he thought it had something to do with the evil spells the Order of Calamity had cast on the underground creatures. But now it seems that it might not be the case. Could it be that the scar of the dead has absorbed the blood of those who died in the war? Oh, right, I used elementary spirit vision to check the condition of the spirit bodies and found that the number of spirit bodies after the battle was also on the low side. I thought that my spirit vision had weakened. Matthew's heart was pounding. Was the destruction of Rolling Stone Town not the ultimate goal of the Order of Calamity? The scar of the dead was. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At the edge of the scorched earth, a giant hand that seemed to be made of countless pieces of paper and ashes broke out of the ground and attacked Matthew aggressively. Matthew was extremely calm as he took 3 steps back. Soldier had already taken his place. In a flash, the 2 short knives crossed each other, and the hand instantly turned into ashes. Hint. You have eliminated a hand of ashes, and your nature affinity has increased slightly. You have obtained a new main mission. Main mission 2. Exterminate the scar of the dead. Description. The scar of the dead is expanding without restraint. It has even threatened the oak forest that you have painstakingly planted. It is time to pull out the tumor of this land. Primary objective. Stop the scar of the dead and prevent it from spreading further to the southwest. Basic reward. Demigod power, including domain, and a large amount of XP. Matthew's eyelids twitched. As expected, the main mission is connected to the scar of the dead. Even though he had already expected it in the depths of his heart. However, the mission content and generous rewards still surprised him. A demigod with a domain. This meant that as long as Matthew reached the 4th rank, with the support of his demigod power and domain, he would be invincible before non-legendary enemies. If he was a demigod in his 3rd tier state, he still had the ability to challenge people 2 tiers above him. This also reflected the difficulty of the task. At the very least, no one knew how to stop the scar of the dead from spreading. The elves of Jade Court did not manage to do so. The druids of the Guardian Highland also failed to do so. Matthew could only rely on his own strength to explore. This was a rather difficult task. But he had to do it because if he did not stop the scar of the dead, the oak forest that he had painstakingly planted would very likely be destroyed. At that time, his path of nature would be completely sealed, and there would be no way for him to advance any further. Let's go and report to the Lord. We need to set up a new marker stone. Matthew took a deep look at the scorched earth in front of him. Then, he turned around and left with his men. At night, Matthew, who couldn't sleep, stood in the north of the oak forest and looked at the scar of the dead. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that this thing was a huge earthworm. After watching for a long time, Matthew even had the illusion that this thing could twist. Matthew. A familiar voice sounded behind him. Matthew looked back. But the next second, he could not help but blurt out, "No, you're not Ella." Under the moonlight, Miss Owl flapped her wings elegantly and holily. There was a sense of majesty and holiness that she did not usually have. "You're very sharp." "Hello, Matthew. Nice to meet you. I'm Asha, the goddess of moonlight." The owl chuckled. She flew to a rock and stood still. Then, she looked at Matthew kindly. "The moon is beautiful, isn't it?" Chapter 88. 88, Not Now, Matthew. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 88. Not Now, Matthew. Translator. Lonely Tree. The moonlight shone through the owl's body, casting a white shadow behind her. Matthew couldn't see her face clearly, but he could vaguely tell that it was a woman's figure. She gave off a beautiful, holy, gentle, and reserved feeling. Goddess. Matthew bowed slightly to show his courtesy. I'm here for you. Asha didn't beat around the bush. Instead, she chose to get straight to the point with a smile. You must be wondering why I would provide so much help for free. That's because I hope to get your help or even protection in the upcoming changes. Matthew nodded slightly, expressing his willingness to listen. The dark days are coming, and Aender will usher in the darkest and most turbulent period after the Age of Enlightenment. Countless evil that was sealed in ancient times are reviving, and the saddest thing for the creatures of this continent is that not only will they have to fight against the twilight creatures, abominations, and other monsters with their mortal bodies, but the gods who fought alongside them during the last dark days will also stand against them this time. When Asha talked about the gods, she did not avoid them at all, as if she were not a member of the gods. She smiled gently. To the gods, the best news is that the Calamity Mage has left. This is exactly the news that the Seven Saint Alliance and you all don't want to hear. But no matter what, this is already an established fact. Darkness and turmoil are coming. Matthew, it won't reach you overnight, but it's already on its way. Matthew asked in a deep voice, what is the Dark Age? And how did you know that the Calamity Mage had left Aender? What if she turns back and kills the gods? Asha seemed to be prepared and immediately replied, the operation of the universe follows a seemingly impermanent but traceable theorem, and so does our plane. Darkness and light always coexist. Before the Age of Enlightenment, the gods and mortals worked together to wipe out most of the dark things on this plane, but they were not completely destroyed. They just hid quietly, waiting for an opportunity to make a comeback. The dark days are coming. When that day officially arrives, the power of all evil creatures will expand to an unimaginable level, and the power that symbolizes light will also be infinitely weakened according to the law of the rise and fall. As for the Calamity Mage, it was her arrival that caused the Dark Ages. If it weren't for the unexpected ascension of the Heavenly Palace, the power of the gods would have been enough to suppress those evil creatures for at least another 1,000 years. In fact, we can't be sure if the Calamity Mage has left, but for the gods who are weak and on the verge of death and still have 100 years of anger in their hearts, this is the best time. They are ready to unite and do something that can overturn the laws of the world. Due to anti-divination, I can't tell you the details of that matter. You only need to know that the Aender continent will slowly enter an era of unrest. Everyone will be involved in the flames of war and disputes. No one will be spared. As she spoke, there was a hint of pity in her tone and expression. Matthew looked at Asha suspiciously. Did the goddess of moonlight mean that she was not one of the gods who caused trouble? What else? There was a hint of dissatisfaction and resentment in Asha's tone. If I was willing to join their ranks, why do you think I voluntarily gave up the domain of Moon, when I was forced to ascend to the throne in the Heavenly Palace, leaving myself with only the domain of Moonlight? Was Asha the moon goddess? Did she voluntarily give up the moon godhood? Matthew knew that he had learned an extremely secretive piece of information. Of course, I admit that giving up that part of my godhood is the best way to preserve myself in the process of ascending to the throne in the Heavenly Palace. The Calamity Mage made the rule that the weaker one is, the closer one is to the mortal world. Moonlight is the medium that can get closest to the material world, so I became one of the few gods who can influence the mortal world. Asha continued, but I do not like what they do. I did not participate in the 3 curses, which is proof. If you doubt this, you can go to the people of the Alliance of 7 Saints to verify it. Matthew nodded. He was willing to believe Asha. After all, it was not difficult to verify such things. So, what do you want me to do for you? Matthew asked. Asha said frankly, I think that the god's crazy plan is unlikely to succeed. If it fails, it will bring irreversible damage to the heavenly palace. I will also be affected. I hope that if that happens, you can give me a certain amount of protection. Matthew was surprised. Why me? I'm just a second-tier mage. Asha sighed softly. The first reason is that I can't find anyone else. With the Heracene efforts of the Seven Saint Alliance, the gods are completely evil in the hearts of people, especially mages. It has been many years since a new druid was born in the Moonlight Forest. My influence in the mortal world is declining day by day. Coincidentally, you appeared in front of me. The second reason is that I think you have a bright future ahead of you. You have Ronan's Patronus on you. I know that guy. He won't waste his few Patronus on someone with no potential. Matthew was slightly shocked. He didn't even realize that the great mage Ronan had permanently cast a Patronus spell on him. And these words coming from Asha's mouth could also be considered a kind gesture in a sense. Oh right, is great mage Ronan really trapped in the astral world? Was this part of the gods' plan? Matthew hurriedly asked. Asha blinked. This is a topic that I can't say. But I can assure you that a scourge like Ronan won't die so easily. Matthew understood instantly. He interpreted at least 3 pieces of information. Ronan was indeed trapped in the astral plane. This was the work of the gods. There was a high chance that Ronan would not die. Matthew pondered. He combed through the goddess words and found no flaws for the time being. Then, he said, I'm willing to provide you with a certain amount of protection as long as it's within my ability. However, the final interpretation of this protection is still in my hands. The extent to which I can do it will depend on how much value you can provide me. These words were very bare. But he won in honesty. After hearing this, Asha was not angry but happy. She smiled and looked at Matthew. What do you need me to provide, young necromancer? Matthew simply asked, I want to know how far you are willing to go for this. Asha said boldly, if you become strong enough in the Dark Age, you can have a wife who used to be the moon goddess. That's all. Unknowingly, Matthew also became a little arrogant. Asha looked at him bitterly. Then what else do you want to do? Greedy necromancers. At this point, her approachable aura instantly vanished. An insufferably powerful aura pressed down on Matthew's chest. Matthew almost fell to his knees. I am the moon goddess. I cannot be blasphemed. Asha suddenly changed into a sacred and inviolable face, and her eyes were filled with disgust as she 100k'd at Matthew. Dirty and weak necromancer, you think you can get your hands on the moon maiden with your mere second-tier strength? I can crush you like an ant. As she spoke, the shadow made of moonlight slowly walked towards Matthew. Matthew's vision seemed to freeze. The world spun. All he could see was a pair of fair, bare feet stepping on the barren land. Those cute and playful toes were so delicious to him. It's the power of charm. Matthew shook his head vigorously. The domain of temperance was suddenly activated. However, this was not enough to immediately remove the charm of the goddess. Instead, it caused Matthew to fall into a longer tug-of-war. After an unknown period of time. Only then did he suddenly wake up from his dazed state. His back was already drenched. His lips were extremely dry. Matthew knelt on one knee, panting. Phew, the goddess really knows how to play, so powerful. Matthew was shocked when he recalled what had just happened. He had the heart of tranquil water, and his will attribute was not low. He was immune to the seduction of the fairy princess Lulu and the succubus, but in front of the goddess of moonlight, all of this almost fell apart. The gods were indeed powerful. At this moment, he suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. He looked down and saw that there was another message on the believer badge. On the eve of the Dark Age, the number of evil art masters on this continent will increase by 100-fold. Remember to be careful of the Order of Calamity. By the way, you have a strong will. I'm very satisfied. Evil art masters. Matthew was deep in thought. At this moment, after being possessed by the goddess, Ella finally woke up. She looked at Matthew, who was kneeling on one knee in a daze, and said in surprise, "Matthew, what are you doing?" Immediately after, Miss Owl's voice became bashful. "Ayaya, I've heard people say that this is a fixed position humans use when they want to seek a mate." "No, Matthew." Matthew didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to explain. But Ella said, "At least not before you master the owl's shape-shifting form." Matthew was completely stunned. Chapter 89. 89, Equilibrium. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 89. Equilibrium. Translator. Lonely Tree. Nature's soul was both conservative and open-minded. Matthew was filled with emotions as he watched Ella fly away shyly. He returned to the hut and recorded the conversation with the goddess in the form of a handwritten copy. Although Matthew shouldn't be affected by the intelligence lock, Matthew wanted to be sure. In the next few days, Matthew's planting of trees slowed down slightly. In the past month, he had planted a total of 1 + 52 trees, which was simply unbelievable in the past. Ella had played a big role in achieving such efficiency. If she had not germinated the seeds day and night, and if Matthew had not mastered the rapid growth spell, the results of the past month would not have been so remarkable. Theoretically speaking, in Rolling Stone Town, only March, April, May, and October were suitable for planting trees. Matthew should be doing his best. Unfortunately, the saplings in the greenhouse were almost exhausted. The oak seeds that Matthew had bought last time were indeed problematic. Many of the seeds could not be saved by Ella. After that, the traveling merchant Jeff never appeared in the market of Rolling Stone Town again. No one in the town usually went to the Guardian Highland. For a time, Matthew lost his source of seeds. He took the time to entrust another merchant to help bring the goods, but it was unknown when he would get the goods. The logistics of this world were still too inefficient. On the other hand, there were still many things waiting for Matthew. For example, advancing and building a cemetery. In the underground cave. One by one, the Silvermoon zombies were wandering around unconsciously. Ah! 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 A few crows flew out of nowhere and dared to peck at the rotting flesh on the zombie's body. In the end, their sharp beaks were blocked by the bark spell. The crow persevered for a while, but it still couldn't eat any meat, so it flew away resentfully. Deep in the cave, a few figures were still busy. "Yes, nail it here. Thank you for your hard work." The mage fire and the torch lit up a corner of the room. Shadows flickered on the wall. Under Matthew's command, a few garrison members closed the last circle of fences against the wall and set up a wooden sign painted with red paint outside the fence. The wooden sign said, "Matthew's Graveyard, Zombies Inside. Beware." With the few alarm traps Matthew had set up himself, the cemetery's approximate range was determined. The cave where the cemetery was located was originally an abandoned underground mine. There were several tunnels leading to the depths of the ground. In order to prevent any more complications, Matthew not only set up warning wooden signs around the cemetery but also blew up the passages. As a result, the cemetery became a sealed underground space except for a few paths leading to the oak forest on the surface. Matthew's zombies and skeletons would be able to move freely here. Although there was no single room, it was far more spacious than the dormitories. When I come back from Bayen City, I will plant a whole circle of black locust near the fence. At that time, the negative energy in the cemetery will have a chance to circulate automatically. He gave a small tip and sent away the garrison members who were helping with the construction. Matthew stood on the edge of the fence and thought. Behind him were the shadows of the undead. This scene would only look horrifying to others. However, for the necromancers who were used to seeing it, it was indescribably beautiful. But the seeds of the black locust tree are not cheap. As expected, no matter which era it is difficult to do anything without money. Matthew shook his head and smiled bitterly in his heart. The black locust tree was a plant that grew in the underworld. Like the phantom butterfly, the black locust tree fed on negative energy. The difference was that when the undead was active at night, the black locust tree would release a certain amount of negative energy to promote the circulation of negative energy. Only during the day would they absorb a small amount of negative energy for growth. The biggest advantage of this plant was that it did not need sunlight. As long as there was water, it could be planted underground. And once the cemetery was surrounded by black locust trees, the negative energy there would almost never leak out. At that time, Matthew planned to add things that the undead liked to the cemetery. Coffins, shrouds, negative energy spring water, loose bones, ropes, saws, rotting plants. Matthew's goal was to turn this place into a miniature negative energy plane. In the future, he even wanted to integrate the ecospheres of the spaces above and below the ground to form a closed loop that could circulate with each other. He had even thought of a name toward the relevant domum. Let's call it Ecosphere. Ainder doesn't seem to have such a domain yet. When I become a legend and can create my own domain, the Ecosphere might become a new domain of a higher level, which would encompass the domains of Oak and the Undying. Now that my body carries two legendary paths, I have to find a way to command them. Even if I can't do that, I have to balance them at least. Just as Matthew was leaning against the wooden sign and thinking, the sound of rocks rolling could be heard from the depths of the cave. Matthew's heart tightened. That was the direction of the tunnel he had blown up earlier. Before he could gather the undead, a shiny bald head emerged from the tunnel. When he saw Matthew, the bald man was also stunned. "We meet again." "Oh, Matthew, right." Matthew looked at Li Weiqi in surprise. "Mr. Li, what are you doing?" Li Weiqi rubbed his hands, a little embarrassed. "These days, I followed the scent of those underground creatures and destroyed 3 nests of underground creatures, but they still managed to escape. 2 days ago, I fought with a bunch of hook horrors that had just woken up from hibernation. I was almost driven to the territory of the benthic demon fish, but in the end, I returned to where I was. When I was approaching the surface, I got lost and could only carve out my way in an unconventional way." Matthew walked over quickly. He discovered that there was a passageway that could only allow one person to pass through where the cave had collapsed. Beside him, there were pebbles everywhere. Matthew was a little shocked. "Mr. Li, did you dig the cave with your bare hands?" Li Weiqi said enthusiastically, "Don't call me Mr. Li. You can call me Li Weiqi or Li. As for the cave, I didn't use my bare hands. I used qi. Matthew had heard of it. He knew that it was AI.GND of extraordinary energy cultivated by martial monks, and it had a completely different nature from magic power. "Li, I noticed that your qi seems to be a little different." Matthew recalled the dragon's roar when he confronted the enemy that day and could not help but ask. According to what he knew, ordinary monks couldn't unleash dragon roars. Li Weiqi's class was called Divine Dragon Sex Disciple, which meant that he was also a special case among the monks. Indeed, Li Weiqi didn't avoid it and introduced generously, that Divine Dragon Monastery, that I was ordained at belongs to a more special branch of the monk faction. Not only do we cultivate qi, but we also strive to use qi to simulate the forms of transcendental life in the universe. The giant dragon is just one of them. There are also monks in the Divine Dragon Monastery who simulate the giant whale in the deep sea and the snake in the sky. Because of this kind of simulation, our chi often carries different temperaments and attributes. Compared to the average monk, our cultivation was even more difficult. Not only did we have to follow the precepts and cultivate our chi, but we also had to track the transcendental creatures that we simulated when necessary. At this point, a bitter smile appeared on his face. This path has its pros and cons. Simulating transcendental lifeforms gives us greater combat abilities, but if such transcendental lifeforms no longer appear in this plane, we will almost permanently lose the possibility of advancing. Matthew was stunned when he heard that. Li Weiqi said in a bright voice, "That's why I've been running around outside all these years, hoping to find traces of the creature I simulated. Unfortunately, ever since it left a paw print in the Divine Dragon Temple 200 years ago, it has never appeared in the mortal world again. I suspect that it has already left this plane." Matthew couldn't help but ask, "What is that creature?" Li Weiqi said the uncommon word in the standard common language, coiling dragon. It's a peculiar dragon that was once active in the eastern continent in ancient times. It's different from the chromatic dragons, metal dragons, or rare dragons in Aender. The coiling dragon is an older and more powerful true dragon. According to the records of the Divine Dragon Temple, the coiled dragon was born a legend. When it matured, it possessed the power of a superior legend or even a divine. I comprehended chi because of its claw prints, but I hesitated because I couldn't find more traces of it. Perhaps this is fate. A giant dragon from the eastern continent. Matthew's heart quivered, and he blurted out, "Then do you know about Su?" Li Weiqi looked at Matthew in surprise. "You actually know about the most famous country in the history of the eastern continent?" History. Matthew was puzzled. Li Weiqi nodded. "I used to travel around the endless ocean and the western coast. I got to know some of the Sioux people who were living in exile there. They told me that there was once a very powerful empire in the eastern continent, but it was destroyed more than 1,000 years ago. It was also because of the fall of the empire that you could see some Sioux tribes on the long coastline of the Aruni Sea and the surrounding islands. Their ancestors had crossed the sea on huge turreted ships hundreds of years ago and settled in Aender. Now, they only retained the features of the Sioux, and most of them had integrated into the local life. Was it destroyed 1,000 years ago?" Matthew was puzzled. If what Li Weiqi said was true. What about the ship that Samantha encountered in her childhood? Matthew wanted to ask more when Li Weiqi smiled. "Are you going to let the zombies and skeletons keep watching our conversation?" Matthew hurriedly took him out of the cemetery. Walking in the oak forest. Li Weiqi closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes, his face was filled with curiosity. "You planted this oak forest yourself. It's incredible. I can feel the love of the oak trees for you and your natural affinity. Even I, a monk, am not as popular as you in the forest. But you are clearly a necromancer, and you even built a cemetery. Wait, are you planning to imitate the Sioux and walk the path of life and death equilibrium?" Matthew's heart jumped. The path of equilibrium. Can you tell me in detail? Li Weiqi said seriously, "Yes, but everything has a price." Matthew nodded and said, "Whatever you want, just say it." Li Weiqi blinked. "Give me a mouthful of water, thank you." Chapter 90. 90. You can watch what's next. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 90. You can watch what's next. Translator. Lonely tree. In the small room, Li Weiqi drank a cup of water and said with confidence, "During the years I was pursuing the coiled dragon, I had dealings with many Sioux. Some of them had advanced professions that were different from those in Aender. An elder of the Sioux told me that in an even more ancient era, there was an elite profession in the eastern continent that had the ability to transcend life and death. Its name was Taoist. It was a pity that the group of Sioux people who came on the ship did not master all the Taoist heritage. Some of them used their professional skills and combined the power of the native shamans of the barbarian Tooth Peninsula to create a new path that balanced life and death. That high-level path was called the Envoy of Equilibrium. Among the Sioux, only adventurers above Tier 8 could advance. However, Envoy of Equilibrium are rare. I've only heard of similar professions on a remote island in the Arunai Sea. The Sioux people on that island are very reclusive and live an isolated life. I helped them kill a sea monster and was lucky enough to gain their recognition, but I still didn't have the chance to come into contact with the real Envoy of Equilibrium. Perhaps this was just a legend among the Sioux. Controlling life and death at the same time was against the common sense of the Ander continent. Taoist priests and shamans fused to become Envoy of Equilibrium. Matthew suddenly had a great interest in this profession. He had studied the information Samantha had given him about the Sioux Nation, but most of it was just groundless rumors or a map of how to get to the Sioux Nation. There was very little information about the secret treasure that the captain's son had mentioned to her. Under such circumstances, Matthew had planned to take a safe and stable path, which was to advance to a high-level necromancer. After all, whether it was the Lord of Paleness or the other advanced undead profession, they would more or less gradually lean towards the evil camp. Only the necromancer's advancement could maintain a delicate balance. It was not difficult to become a high-level necromancer. Matthew only needed to find a few unfamiliar immortals in the wilderness and have a heart-to-heart talk with them all night. Before daybreak, one could complete the Night of the Undead ritual and obtain the title of a high-level necromancer by obtaining the recognition of the unfamiliar undead by any means. However, this method of advancement was relatively mediocre, and there was almost no additional increase in strength. It was Matthew's last choice. However, things were different now. He accidentally learned about the Envoy of Equilibrium. Whether it was a shaman or a Taoist, they should be walking the path of a mage. A necromancer trying to advance should not be unable to meet the prerequisites. Of course, all of this was just Matthew's imagination. According to Li Weiqi, it would be extremely difficult to advance to become an Envoy of Equilibrium. Matthew only wanted to give it a try. If it didn't work, he would return to his original plan and advance to a high-level necromancer. Since he had the path of life and death and the support of his domain, his combat strength was several times that of an ordinary person. He did not have that much desire for the additional boost brought by the special advancement. Then, Matthew and Li Weiqi talked about the small island of the Sioux. When he found out that Matthew was interested in advancing to the Envoy of Equilibrium, Li Weiqi asked Matthew to find a pen and paper without saying anything. He wrote a recommendation letter for Matthew. This moved Matthew. Before he could voice his doubts, Li Weiqi laughed and said, "The oak trees have already told me what you've done here. Matthew, you're a person who loves nature. I don't want you to lean towards evil in the future. The Envoy of Equilibrium is the most suitable advancement for you. It's just that you can't have too much hope. When I was walking on the island, I realized that the Sioux didn't have any special abilities. They might have completely lost the inheritance of their ancestors. This wasn't surprising. No matter what race they were, they would lose a lot in the long dark years." After writing the recommendation letter, Li Weiqi said, "And I'm not helping you for free. For the next few days, I'll be living in the mayor's house of Rolling Stone Town. The bustling town is not suitable for me. Only your oak forest is more suitable as a cultivation residence. I hope you can agree to let me live in the forest for a long time." How could Matthew disagree? After Eli left, he was about to go out to look for an opportunity to advance. Coincidentally, a Tier 5 big shot took the initiative to come and take his place. Although Li Weiqi was most likely staying here to monitor the Underdark for Rhaegar. However, Matthew, as the beneficiary, was still relieved. At least for the time being, the oak forest was safe. The two of them chatted for a while. Finally, Li Weiqi suddenly said seriously, "Matthew, it's best if you don't leave this place for too long. Matthew said solemnly, "What do you mean? Will something big happen here?" Li Weiqi nodded and said, "It's a very serious matter. I'm afraid that if you leave for too long and I take over your harem will fall in love with me." Matthew was shocked. Harem. Li Weiqi couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Your oaks. You didn't expect it, did you?" Matthew laughed dryly. As expected, monks were hard to understand. After getting the clues about the envoy of equilibrium from Li Weiqi, Matthew began to speed up his preparations before his advancement. Apart from the necessary items to purchase, information was more important. Li Weiqi's information was not clear enough to be used as a basis. So, at 4 o'clock the next morning, Matthew walked briskly to the cauldron house. He moved to the top floor. Matthew saw the mild-tempered tower spirit 177. "Good morning, Matthew. You look very pleased with yourself. As someone who has been through it before, I guess you're in love. And I'm quite satisfied with my life with my partner. Oh, just like me and Little Blossom in the past. It's really sad to think about it," Tower Genie 177 said in frustration. "That's not the case. I just found a suitable opportunity to advance. I have 2 things to ask you," Matthew quickly explained. "Ask away." The Tower Genie waved his hand. "I'll give you a 50% discount on the consultation fee before Ronan returns. Won't you get the consultation fee in full regardless?" Matthew asked curiously. A look of grief and indignation immediately appeared on the Tower Genie's face. "No, I only have a 10% cut. In fact, I don't plan to surrender the consultation fee until Ronan comes back. This way, after giving you a 50% discount, I'll still earn much more than before." It seemed that the great mage Ronan was also good at exploiting people. Matthew tactfully stopped asking. 2 keywords. The first is the Scar of the Dead. I want to know the origin and story of the Scar of the Dead, as well as the potential solution to solve the spread of the Scar of the Dead. The second keyword was the Envoy of Equilibrium. This profession did not involve the Sioux country, but it was related to the Sioux. Please don't tell me that it was another confidential matter. He made his intentions clear. The tower spirit pondered for a moment before suddenly shouting, "Number 1001. Go and bring me the shining thing on the cabinet." Very quickly, a panting little fellow appeared on the other side of the elevator. It was a construct the size of a halfling, and its body looked rather thin. At this moment it was carrying a document bag on its back. The bag was heavy and seemed to contain a lot of content. "This is all the information about the Scar of the Dead in the Seven Saint Alliance. It's free. The Alliance welcomes anyone who wants to solve the Scar of the Dead to work hard, but it's very difficult for you to find the answer you want directly." The Tower Genie handed the folder to Matthew. Then, he proudly introduced the small automaton. "See, Matthew. This is my new son, number 1001. I've always felt too lonely. It's not a good thing to always look for a partner. Why don't I find myself a son? What do you think?" Seeing the small automaton trembling, Matthew could only try his best to smile sincerely. "A great child looks like he has a bright future." "I agree, Matthew." The Tower Genie was overjoyed. "I knew he had a bright future ahead of him. Look, his eyes are very similar to mine. One look and I can tell that we are father and son. There's no mistake about that." After saying that, he was about to carry number 1001 up and play with it for a while. "There's still the Envoy of Equilibrium," Matthew hurriedly reminded it. The Tower Genie was confused. "Didn't you say that just now? That's confidential information. Everything related to the Sioux country is top secret unless you can kill Ronan and replace him. But you definitely can't do it now, right, Matthew? My suggestion is that you can try your luck, but don't get too involved. I have high hopes for you. After you have successfully advanced, please come to the Cauldron House to find me immediately. I will help you with the procedures to join the Seven Saint Alliance. Me. Join the Alliance of Seven Saints. Matthew was a little surprised. The Tower Genie nodded. Of course, Ronan has already written you a letter. As long as you reach Tier 3, you will immediately become the existence with the highest authority among the peripheral members. However, after that, you will have to rely on your own hard work. After all, Ronan's life and death are unknown. The value of your relationship with him will be greatly reduced. The Seven Saint Alliance was the most powerful mage organization on the Aender continent, so Matthew would not miss out on it. The various arrangements made by Great Mage Ronan warmed his heart. What? Are you going to leave now? The Tower Genie was playing with the small automaton while looking at Matthew casually. Matthew revealed an embarrassed smile. Actually, I have another request. The Tower Genie said straightforwardly, why the need to be so polite? We are the first two founders of the Ronan Must Die organization. We are inseparable. You may venibum to say, just say it. Matthew directly ignored the traitor's declaration in his words. He took out the glass bottle from his bag. I know you've been lonely, so I found you a companion. Of course, I have my own requirements. I hope you can train him well. When I return to take him away from you next, I hope to get an obedient little guy. As he spoke, he smashed the bottle on the ground. Caw, caw, caw. After the bottle shattered, a frog jumped out. The Tower Genie said unhappily, Hey, Matthew, what do you think I am? You want me to train some creatures? Do you think I'm a brothel's madam? Besides, I'm not willing to play with any creature. I have my own interests, hobbies, and preferences. Look at what you've brought me. A frog. I'm not interested at all. As soon as he finished speaking, the frog's body expanded rapidly, turning into a ridiculously fat troll. Who was it that woke Sinwak up from his sleep? The troll roared in dissatisfaction. There was a crisp bang. Matthew saw the Tower Genie smash Automaton 1001 into a wall far away. Oh, son, you're still young. You can't watch the next training scene. Tower Genie 177 stared at the troll's fleshy body. His expression became more and more playful. Back home. Matthew wanted to go to the Lord's mansion first to discuss with Zeller about becoming a consultant. However, just as he was about to leave, the town's postman unexpectedly brought him a letter. The envelope was very large, and the edges were decorated with green tree patterns. There was also a beautiful bow tied with silver satin. The address of the letter was displayed. This letter came from the holy city of the Wood Elves, the Jade Court. Matthew pondered for a moment and opened the letter. A faint fragrance assaulted his senses.